really important and fortunate that we have Andy to talk to us, as well as Jim Jacobs tonight, so we can talk about everything that has happened, both good and bad, and consider what we should be doing from this point on. And with that, I just want to ask Andy to launch into it.
Let me unmute myself. Thank you, Linda. And let me say to Melanie that it sounded like can you hear me? Oh, okay. I got the unmute myself thing after I already unmuted myself.
Oh, no, you're fine.
Melanie, I thought you were sounding like Groucho there when you sort of said, well, I wouldn't want to be seen in any Zoom that have me. That's what I thought of. So it's I will be seen with all of you anytime. Let me just say that. And I love this group, and I love Jim Jacobs, and I hope I get to stay on long enough to hear his words of wisdom and to participate in that discussion. But as Linda was suggesting, this is my little apartment in DC. I just walked in here wearing as instructed, very dressed down clothes. We're not allowed to wear our pins. There's air marshals traveling with us and, guarding us at all the airports. And it's just kind of crazy. We're not to walk around here. Don't think that the horrible breach of security that happened on Wednesday is like the end of the matter, right? Because this has been under this kind of anti-democratic ideology has been being in development a long time, and it's we're continuing to taste the poison fruits of it. We certainly will through the inauguration and after that. But in any event, we are going to begin voting, I believe at 7:30 on the resolution, Jamie Raskin's resolution, to urge Vice President Pence to invoke the 25th Amendment. And we're all organized here for me to vote at the last possible second. So I'll stay with you as long as I can. So in terms of what's happening here, I would so much rather be talking to you about what I do feel is a bright future. We did elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, our first person of color, our first woman, first African-American, first Asian-American vice president ever. So amazing. And what about Wednesday morning? How weird was it to have this incredible start of the day? Distinguished Black pastor becoming a senator in Georgia, which had never elected a person of color, certainly an African-American person, and a young Jewish guy. And I just thought back to all the ways that Blacks and Jews have fought for civil rights over the decades. And I was just so amazed by that. I almost didn't dare hope for it. And it doesn't, there's a lot of conservative Democrats in both chambers, and the margins are super skinny. And it doesn't mean we're going to be able to run a progressive platform straight on through. But still, the difference between between Debbie Stabenow being the chairwoman of the Agriculture Committee and being the ranking member is just humongous. I mean, we Democrats will have the gavel, Chuck Schumer in the Senate at large, and then every single committee, and we'll decide what comes forward. And all this whole thing we just went through of 400 plus bills with some bipartisan support, and even more that were just straight up Democratic bills, just going nowhere and in Mitch McConnell's graveyard. So that's really huge. But, the insurrection on Wednesday, I mean, it's a child of, genocide of Native American peoples. It's a child of many, many years, but let's start with Nixon's Southern strategy of purposeful racism and nativism is part of the Republican playbook. Remember, Donald Trump was doing the birtherism thing long before he was even running for president. And stoking hate and a sense of grievance, and among white people, white working class people, you know, the noose, the anti-Semitic T-shirts and sweatshirts, the Confederate battle flag inside the Union Capitol, our capital. It was just a desecration of so many of our values, but joined together with all of Trump's very purposeful, being sort of the culmination, hopefully, of this strategy of purposefully denigrating people of color and immigrants and people who pray differently and so forth. There really also is this fact that working people in this country have gotten the short end of the stick for 40 years. And they deserve to be mad, not at each other about what they look like or how they pray or any of that stuff. But we have the worst crisis of income and wealth inequality in 100 years. You know, I studied Justice Brandeis's quote, and I guess he didn't even really say it, but no one knows who else did. So I still attribute it to him, that you can either have wealth concentrated in a very few hands, or you can have democracy, but you can't have both. And, you know, I just think about growing up in Berkeley. Yes, Berkeley, not Huntington Woods, you know, where the working class people of Berkeley, when I was a child, you know, most households had two parents, not all. But the point is, even in a two-parent household, mostly one worked in the economy and the other did the immense work of running the household and the kids and a lot of other stuff. But on one income out in the economy, people lived a more middle-class life than they live today with two parents both working and living paycheck to paycheck. And that cannot, until workers are free to form unions, until we have a $15 an hour minimum wage, until pre-K is universal and college is free for poor and working class people, at least at the great community colleges like Jim used to run. And we seriously deal with college debt, and people can get married and maybe buy a house, for God's sake, maybe have children if they want to. You know, then we're going to continue to be in a world of trouble. But, you know, I'd really rather not make a big speech about last Wednesday and just more hear your questions or just have a conversation, because I don't know how long I can stay, and I'd prefer that. But, you know, I don't need to tell this group that this was an insurrection against our government and our democracy. People armed, people with weapons, people with firearms and with mace and bear spray and knives and, you know, cuffs and on and on. And it was, you know, it was terrifying, and it was a desecration of our capital. And, you know, since this is a peace group, you know, just right now, I just put out a tweet. I mean, you know, there was a wonderful statement by dissidents in our State Department. If anybody didn't see it, there's a reference to it, I think, in the New York Times, where they really called out Pompeo to say something like that we are a democracy with elections, and somebody just won the election named Joe Biden, and he will be the next president. One of the idea that we have a Secretary of State who said that there will be a peaceful transition of power to the next Trump administration is just, you know, such a huge problem for America's role in the world. It's just so damaging. And late last week, I talked with the Haitian ambassador to Washington. And I say that in air quotes because he's not a legitimate ambassador by the Haitian Constitution, ambassadors can only be appointed with the approval of the Senate, and there is no Senate. There is no Chamber of Deputies. He's ruling by decree. And this ambassador is a apologist for this undemocratic regime in Haiti, which is, deeply problematic. And what position am I in to talk to this guy? Good thing I'm a proponent of the US dealing with other countries with a lot more humility and admitting our own faults and not acting like we should control the world or be the policeman of the whole world. But still, I wouldn't prefer to have to speak to him in a situation where our own president just tried to overthrow our democracy. So this is a serious problem for peace and diplomacy, and the idea of democracy around the world, just because of the role the United States plays. And we are going to pass this resolution tonight, urging Mike Pence to work with the cabinet. And as some of you who may be connoisseurs of the 25th Amendment, he could also work with us as an alternative through a body that we create. It's right there in the Constitution, in the 25th Amendment, to determine that Trump needs to be removed. And if he doesn't, we will, and he won't. So we will vote tomorrow to impeach Donald Trump, who will become the only president ever to have been impeached twice. And when I put down my phone before I started talking, 3 Republicans had stepped up to say they will vote for impeachment, and there will be more. There will be more. And I hope Peter Meyer is one of them, but I'm working on him. I don't know yet. He's the new Republican from the Grand Rapids area. So we will defend our democracy and we will move on. But it's going to be something that causes lasting damage. You all know. I mean, a peace group knows war isn't just bad in the moment of hostilities, right? War, violence, killing, it leaves scars and damage to souls, to people, to communities, to relationships. I mean, for as long as people live, generally. And I'm so sad that we already lost 6 people now. And, Howie Liebengood committing suicide after his role, in helping to police things. I think because he felt like he didn't, I don't know. I shouldn't talk about why someone committed suicide. I guess I have no idea, but it's just super, super sad. So anyway, thank you so much, Linda. And I'm really, as long as I can, or as long as you want to, I'm happy to hear questions or just.
Yep, we got some questions here, so I will read them off of the chat for you.
Thank you.
What are the peace initiatives you expect from President-elect Biden? What are the peace initiatives of the Progressive Caucus?
Well, that's really an interesting question. In terms of President-elect Biden, let me start with where I'm at, and to some extent in the Progressive Caucus. I was disappointed that we did not succeed. This is my saw within the community of the Progressive Caucus, that I'm always, I never make it as high a priority as I think it should be. Straight up talking about how we need to spend way less on the military in this country, and we need to cut. They say defense spending. It's not defense spending, right? Military spending massively. And I don't, 10%, 20%, 30%. It could be 30, 40%. It could, we don't even know. We don't have the facts. We don't take it seriously. With the the Defense Department's the only part of the government that doesn't even do audits and loses like literally hundreds of millions of dollars. And oops, well, we don't know where that money went from the 2018 like they literally can't tell you what happened to it. It's astounding. So we've got to cut spending if we want to achieve our priorities. And by the way, not just domestic priorities, right? I mean, global warming is gobbling up the world. We need to help. We cause the problem. The vast majority of greenhouse gases out there came from the Industrial Revolution to today, from a very small number of wealthy countries, and more recently, China and India and so forth. But we need to help we need resources to help poor countries switch over to solar and solar thermal and wind and offshore wind and geothermal and advanced energy storage. So we need to end the conflict in Yemen and end our complicity in it and our role in it. And we have to do it right now. That is something I hope the Biden administration might help with. One of the ways I personally look at the world that I don't think the Biden administration is all the way there, and I don't even know about the Progressive Caucus, is one of the most damaging things is this whole setup of you got, the Shia versus the Sunni, Iran versus the Saudi bloc, and setting up this kind of, clash, and that we must take sides and all that. It's super damaging. It's not realistic. And I would like the Biden administration to get in there and really try to have a fundamentally different approach to Iran. Barack Obama talked about that. I don't think he really did it. I think we obviously participated in overthrowing a democratic government there in 1953. And I think that Iranians don't feel that we respect their astounding culture, not the, Islamist regime or whatever that's there, the fundamentalist regime, I should say, but, the thousands of years of history of Iran as an amazing, creator of math and science and art and language and literature. And so I don't mean to be, I'm not kind of, I don't think naive or very accepting of what Iran does with the Houthis and with Hezbollah and with militias in Iraq and so forth. But I think that we could have a fundamentally different relationship there, and that would be huge. So, those are a few things. I can't not talk about nuclear weapons and nuclear proliferation and our letting go of our treaties with Russia. We need to, get back to treaties with Russia. We need treaties with China. We need to start massively reducing nuclear weapons. Stop saying, well, we have to, redo them and spend trillions of dollars and next generation of nuclear weapons and all this. We need to massively reduce nuclear weapon stockpiles around the world. And we need to fight proliferation in other countries, but it's too hypocritical. We'll never succeed unless we start taking seriously reducing our own nuclear stockpile. That's my view.
And next, are you concerned about the new Trump appointees heading the military?
Say that again. Am I concerned about General Austin? Was that the
new Trump appointees heading the military?
The Trump. I am, but basically, I think that General Milley I think that the leaders of our armed services are done with Trump, and they are not going to participate, I hope, in any of his last minute shenanigans, or certainly his refusal to transfer power. And Trump, why people think he's a strong leader, he tells it like it is and all these things. Jim will explain all that later, I guess. but anyway, he's a coward. He's an absolute, a bully is a coward, right? he is, there's no way he's going to stay in the White House and fight it out and, be carried out there. He has no guts. He's run away from any real danger or, anything requiring courage his whole life. And so I was worried about an October surprise. Even now, the idea that he has he has the nuclear codes is super frightening, and we need to remove him. But I don't focus a lot on his appointments in the Defense Department, as horrible as they are. I just think it's too late for him to do.
Okay, continuing on the topic of removing him, what if you could clarify, what are the penalties for him, or what happens under both the 25th Amendment and impeachment? Going forward for him, what does that mean?
So the 25th Amendment has nothing to do with penalties, except you don't get to be president. I mean, it's removing him from.
He doesn't lose pension or anything like that, or
No,
under that? No.
And and impeachment, I don't think has anything to do. I don't even know. Someone else probably does. I don't think it has anything to do with his pension. It means that he's removed as president. And crucially,
If he's convicted under the impeachment.
sorry, yeah, impeachment is just an indictment, which is what the House does. And then the Senate has to vote 2/3 to convict him or remove him. Now, he would already be gone from office. But one of the things that we would accomplish by conviction in the Senate is that we would say he could never hold office again. Now, there's one other way to do that, which is the 14th Amendment, which was written I think it took effect in 1868, but it came about after the Civil War. And it has a clause that says that anyone who took up arms or fought against the United States, and has some other language which easily could encompass Trump's activities and behavior, can no longer hold an office of trust of the United States. And that has never been used except in the immediate aftermath of the Civil War, but there it sits. I mean, it is the Constitution, and the language is very clear. Someone would have to determine that applies to Donald J. Trump, right? So, and by the way, some people think it ought to apply to some of my colleagues, like, the 81 who signed on to the Texas lawsuit and voted against Arizona's votes and voted against Pennsylvania's votes. Or, even more of them, they're freshmen who weren't there to join the Texas lawsuit, like my neighbor, Lisa McLean, who, just as I was coming on here, I was listening to her speech on the floor, her maiden speech, her first speech, calling for unity. And I mean, anyway. But what I really think is that Donald Trump has committed so much wrong. He's done so much wrong. He's committed crimes, and he's more likely to be prosecuted in state court than in federal court. And so pay attention to the Attorney General of New York. That's what I would say. And the Southern District.
Question about bills that were passed in the House last session and sat on McConnell's desk. Could they be picked up by the new Congress? And are there particular bills that you hope will be revisited soon?
Nope, they're dead. They can be picked up in the sense of pick them up and introduce them and start from scratch again. But that's it. So a Congress lasts 2 years. So we just started the 117th Congress. And I could introduce something this year, and if we don't pass it by December, the next session is still the same Congress, and you can just keep going for that 2 years. But at the end of the 2 years, start from scratch. So yes, there are many bills. We will reintroduce the PRO Act, the Protecting the Right to Organize Act. We will reintroduce the College Affordability Act with my America's College Promise Act inside it. We already reintroduced HR 1 to massively reform and undergird our democracy, stopping voter suppression, getting rid of gerrymandering all across the country, having public financing of congressional elections at no cost to the taxpayers, getting rid of the revolving door, just many, many things, automatic voter registration. I mean, many, many things. So we'll be reintroducing a lot of bills. I was so excited to hear Joe Biden say, "I want $15 an hour passed right now." I mean, that's amazing. So we will reintroduce the Raise the Wage Act, Violence Against Women Act, all of our gun control bills, closing the Charleston loophole and universal background checks. So we will reintroduce a lot of bills. The Equality Act. I mean, the great thing is, the great thing is if you introduce legislation, even at the end of the Congress, you've got, you've signed up people to sponsor it with you, and you finalize the language, which is really hard. You've duked it out with the interest groups that want to support it. So for example, right at the end of the last Congress, I introduced a bill, or a pair of twin bills actually, to require plan advisors and fiduciaries involved in workers' investments, pensions, 401ks, all that stuff, to have a sustainable investment plan, to offer ESG investments, environment, social, and governance investments, basically, investments with values in them to save the planet, to stop pollution, for human rights, for treating workers decently, for clean corporate governance. And so now it's a lot easier to reintroduce them in this Congress. And, all the groups that support that kind of thing already signed on, and we did that work, so you can just go. And so we will reintroduce many bills and hope that now we can finally pass them.
So the Peace Group started in the shadow of the Patriot Act 18 years ago. So this person wonders if now the act can be used against the far-right insurrectionists.
Well, that makes me think that I was going to say in terms of the my peace initiatives and the Progressive Caucus and Biden administration, we need to say that the AUMFs that are out there are dead. And if President Biden wants to go to war, he's going to have to come back to us and ask Congress to authorize any, offensive activity, military activity around the world. That's a whole nother thing. In terms of the Patriot Act, I don't know. I mean, there are so many statutes on the books about conspiracy, sedition, violence against the government. I'm not an expert in that, but we have been having a lot of discussions, and it's not hard to hold someone accountable who takes a selfie of himself destroying property in the U.S. Capitol. I mean, there are going to be scores and scores of people who will be prosecuted justly so. We just need to hold the very highest people accountable.
There are a couple of questions about whether the new administration should prioritize expanding the Senate by making DC and Puerto Rico states.
I'm sorry, Melanie. After these questions, we do have to wrap up, as Congressman Levin does have to go and vote. My apologies.
Okay. Oh, that's okay. We knew that going in. Thanks.
Stephanie, your thing still says Stephanie Marocchi. Is that what you're going by?
No, I'm going to change my last name, but it's kind of been a struggle legally doing it with COVID.
Oh.
So
Stephanie got married during COVID. Let's all hear it for Stephanie.
Thank you.
So exciting. Love conquers all.
Soon.
Okay, so now I lost the question because I love love. What
yes, DC and Puerto Rico statehood.
Yes. Puerto Rico statehood is complicated, a little bit more complicated. The need for DC statehood is smacking us in the face right now. I don't know if you all have read about this. I forget if people have written about it or if you thought about it. If DC was a state, the governor could have called out the National Guard right away. DC needs to be a state for so many reasons. Now, I don't know. This gets to the question of, how the Senate is going to treat bills, what they'll do about the filibuster, and a lot of procedural things like that. But let me tell you, we passed DC statehood through the House in the 116th Congress, and we will pass it through the House and fight super hard for it to be passed in the Senate. And Joe Biden is ready to sign it. And what a beautiful day that would be. And have you ever all been here? I mean, there's the abstract thing, but I'm sitting here in a jurisdiction of 700,000 people who do not have, have taxation without representation. It's an obscenity, and it needs to change. And that's not just about political power. Although, hey, don't mind that part.
And Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I'm for Puerto Rico. If you talk to the Puerto Ricanas in our Congress, in our House, which is Nidia Velazquez and AOC, and I forget if there are others, but those are the two that I'm close with that I talk to. They want to go through a process. I mean, some of y'all who are older than me and have been, or old like me, I should say, and have been involved in the peace movement, know that back in the day, a lot of the progressives in Puerto Rico were they were nationalists. They wanted independence. And I think the independence thing has somewhat gone away, but because of honoring like a democratic process, they want to have a referendum, I think. And so anyway, it's not going to happen on the same kind of timeline. They really want to have a process where it's very clear to the people of Puerto Rico that they decided what they wanted and then we implemented it, instead of us just, passing statehood without them, having as much of a say.
All right. Do you have to go vote now?
Do you have a couple more questions?
Okay.
One more.
All right. Will you introduce the Lawson-Levin Social Security Bill?
Say it again.
Will you introduce the Lawson-Levin Social Security Bill?
Wow, the Lawson-Levin Social Security Bill. I don't know. Is that like Sandy Levin?
I don't know.
So someone speak up and tell, is that literally what it says?
Yes.
All right, who's that?
Joyce Peralta, where are you?
Unmute, Joyce.
Speak up.
Hi, Joyce.
You had Larson in, we sat in a
whole. Oh, okay. There is okay. Yeah.
Up, really, I wasn't dreaming.
No. Okay, so Mr. Lawson is this really towering other congressman from Florida who doesn't look much like Mr. Larson of Connecticut. So it's Larson.
Oh, I said it wrong. Sorry.
No, that's okay. I should have, it's so close. I should have thought of that. Absolutely. So this is the Social Security 2100 Act. It would make sure Social Security is solvent beyond the beginning of the next century. It would uncap the contributions. So, my dear constituent in, I don't want to pick on anybody in particular, but some of my wealthiest constituents, would keep paying on their income right up to the top. And also it would raise people's contribution, but a super small amount, and it would increase benefits by way more than, people's contributions. So I think like 50 cents people would give more, but that's a lot, over all your working life, if everybody contributes a little tiny bit more. And yes, Joyce, I will absolutely reintroduce that with Mr. Larson. And that's the kind of thing. So I'll go, and Jim, Macomb, there's no place more important to talk about than Macomb County, right? In terms of American politics. And really, so afterwards, I'll call Jim and say, what did you say about the importance of, what if we really shored up Social Security? What if we really had a $15 an hour minimum wage? And what if we, really had universal pre-K, and working people were like, dang, the Democratic Party is my meal ticket, so I don't care about all this other stuff. That's where I'm voting because that's how I, that's my meal ticket right there. Anyway, thank you all so much. I'm an old peacenik from when I was put in charge of the Bethesda post office by the War Resisters League in 1980 when Jimmy Carter reinstated draft registration to, what do we say? Rattle his saber when the Ruskies invaded Afghanistan. So there you go. That's admitting my age. And so I need your advice and counsel. I need you pushing me and telling me what's going on. And so thank you for your advocacy. I don't have other groups like this. I think not a lot of members of Congress have a group just like this. So I'm really proud to represent you all.
Well,
thanks, Linda. I'm going to
you
go
so
vote
much.
to get rid of that guy.
Get rid of him.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andy.
Everything you do.
Be safe. Thank you.
Okay, so we want to continue the meeting with Jim Jacobs. And who's going to tell us about Macomb County? Jim?
Okay, thank you. Am I unmuted? Yes.
Yes.
Good. First, this is a really hard act to follow. I mean, here you have the congressman, but let me try to bring it together by saying the only way Andy Levin is going to do good things for us and good things for the country is if people like the Huntington Woods Peace Group and others are constantly pushing him, raising the right issues, and getting out into the streets. In some ways, what we have here is a congressman who is looking for and actively wanting a lot of input, and that input should be in the broadest possible terms. So there's a great need at this point not to depend on the Biden administration and all the smart people that he's put into office, but to really look at what we're faced with as a result of the election. And that's really when I originally wanted to get involved in coming back to talk, that's what I really wanted to focus on. So we're going to have to shift kind of gears and really talk a little bit about Macomb County, not just all the nuts and bolts about Macomb County, but really as a kind of the model, or kind of the implications for what's going on in Macomb County, for what it means for the country at large. And let me just state it real clear. Trump may leave, Trump may be impeached, he's going to leave office, but there are literally millions of people in the United States, essentially a lot of them white working class people, who believe the election was stolen, who believe that the lies and the mischaracterizations of this election. And they're going to be around, and they're going to be dealing with issues for they're going to put pressure on the Biden administration for the next 4 years. So our challenge, and I think the challenge that I want to kind of focus on, is what can we do to at least get people to start not buying the lies that people like Trump were able to deal with. And this is not a small matter. As many of you, the election was a kind of disappointment in a lot of ways. We dodged a bullet. If Trump had not been so irrational and stupid, a better Republican candidate could have, had a much more of an impact on the election than Trump. So Macomb County is a good place to start by talking about these issues. So let's quickly just do a little facts on the election. Turnout in Macomb County was about 71% of the voters. That's an 18% increase in the numbers of people who voted since 2016. In some areas of the county, the turnout was 80%. Overall, despite a lot of hard work, and there are people on this call, I noticed saw some names of people from Macomb County who worked hard on the election. It was kind of a real, disappointment. Trump carried the county 53% to about 45% for Biden. And if you think about it on a national level, there were 150 counties in the United States that had voted for Obama in 2012 and voted for Trump in 2016. Only 25 of those counties were flipped back to Democratic by the Biden slate. It's true that Biden increased his voting share in every Macomb County community, and in some important precincts, things did flip from Trump to Biden, but there was a lot of work done by the National Democratic Party, a lot of work done by county residents, and yet it was kind of disappointing to see the results. So the question about why weren't we more successful in Macomb County? Why was Trump so able to still turn out large numbers of people who voted for him, despite the pandemic, despite all the obvious issues that we face? So let's try to address those kinds of questions. The first part of this is to note, and this is true in all white working class counties in the country, that there's a difference in Macomb County, a growing difference around this question of income inequality. In the southern part of the county, and that means, everything up through Sterling Heights, Clinton Township, Warren, Fraser, Roseville, East Detroit, etc. That part of the county was carried by Joe Biden 52 to 46%. In the poor working class areas, the areas where there are large numbers now of African Americans and new immigrants, they voted for the Democratic Party. However, in the growing parts of the county, in the northern parts of the county, those communities like Macomb Township, Chesterfield, etc., Trump carried those parts of the county 62 to 36%. Biden's vote in those parts of the county was 5.4% less than what Gretchen Whitmer got in 2018. And to go back to something which I've talked to you about before, these now are not Reagan Democrats. These are not people who are voting pissed off at the Democratic Party because they don't represent them anymore. These are now people who consider themselves Republican. And as we know, unfortunately, as a result of their voting, Macomb County's local elected officials steadily moved towards the Republican Party. Fred Miller, who's one of the great leaders of the Macomb County Democrats and the county clerk, lost his position to a Republican. Republicans now control all the county offices except the sheriff and the county executive, and they also are now a majority of the commissioners. So the question of why this is happening in this kind of area is important for us to consider. So first, I think context matters. That is, when you look at what goes on in terms of why people are voting for Republicans, in Macomb County, Republicans are often seen as the progressive, the creative people. They've managed to avoid some of the scandals that have occurred in local politics in the county. And most importantly, when you look at most of the local Macomb County Democrats, they tend to not have any vision of what should a suburban working class community deal with. They're in the same, that they tend to shy away from the $15 an hour minimum wage. They're not involved in Black Lives Matter issues, even though there were large demonstrations in the county in support for that. So when you look at the local Democratic Party from the perspective of many people in those communities, there isn't very much collaboration or consistency in their vision of what a white working class suburban community should be doing. So the local politics kind of mirrors the kind of passivity and the belief that just need to keep electing a few good leaders and you'll be able to keep the county moving. I think Trump correctly saw that these traditional Democrats are perceived as not being very useful, not being very, not willing to do anything. And there's where this kind of, and I want to, make this point, when we talk about white working class communities, there's a tendency to see them as, quote, authoritarian, easily swayed to support, leaders who get the job done. I think in some ways, when you eliminate vision and you eliminate ideology and politics, then people do in fact look at those questions and say, yeah, let's elect somebody who's going to get the job done. So this issue of authoritarians versus democracy, I think is somewhat wrong. I think within the democratic process, there's a tendency to certain kinds of authoritarian actions. And what eliminates that is much more of a focus on politics and political ideology. Third, race clearly played a major role. However, very differently than I think it has been in the past in Macomb County. The diversity and the consistency of support for some things in Detroit and Black Lives Matter was there in the county. The issue of defunding the police hurt, especially because people do have a different view of police and what their role is in communities like in Macomb County. But race can be, I think, handled and certainly should be dealt with. Again, a demonstration in May of about 12,000 people in Macomb County on the way up in the areas of Clinton Township on 20 Mile Road was a significant action, and that I think needs to be continued. COVID was very important, but not in the way that many of us, would think. For a lot of people in Macomb County, the COVID issue was a balance between school and work. The issue of not having appropriate childcare, the issues of trying to deal with teaching at home were really important ones for people who were working, who were called into work because they were either essential workers or they were working in the auto plants. And we can't kind of gloss over that. And finally, I think, and would like to also echo something that my colleague Ron Aronson has written about and talked about. There really is an absence of a kind of grassroots democratic vision of what a working class suburb is and what it should be. How does it fit into the metropolitan area? These are not communities that are going to move to become like a Royal Oak or have a great downtown, but there are places where individuals live, raise families, look for public education, look for transportation, and how we come to grips with that within the progressive movement, I think, is an important question. We tend not to really have much to say when you say, what's the future of a white working class community? What's the future of even a diverse working class community? If you looked at what the Democratic Party says about it, or even progressives, they tend not to have a good handle on these questions. So on those basis, if we're going to move ahead, what needs to be done is first to take very seriously suburban politics. Local leadership does matter, and progressive local leadership matters. And one of the just critiques, and I've talked to Andy about this, that I would make of what the Democratic Party was doing in Macomb County is there were lots of national call-ins, but very, very few people were mobilized within the communities who were progressives to go door to door to talk to some of the individuals in the county itself. Second, there needs to be a much more development of a civic culture in communities like Macomb County. It's amazing how fast every issue becomes a political issue in Macomb County. There aren't local leadership groups, not just peace groups, but just local leadership, community-based organizations that take on issues so that they don't go into the political atmosphere. That the question of how you mobilize people locally to solve their own problems, the lack of that civic culture plays a great role in hurting Macomb County. Third, this is the time, I think, to utilize a lot of the issues that were raised around the election by the Republicans, how the election was stolen, and turn that around to a discussion of what the Republican Party stands for, the lack of diversity, the issue of how many people are registered to vote, are voting, and create a situation where more and more issues are raised around what the Republican Party stands for. Now, in order to do that, you have to have a vision of what you want. And I think partly the Republican Party does well in Macomb County because people don't come up with that kind of alternative, and that alternative has to be made real. And finally, the question of equity, not just for African Americans, for immigrants, for women. These are the people who can build the future in Macomb County are going to be from these constituencies. And I think at this point, people accept the view in Macomb County that they're tied to the metropolitan area, but how those ties are and how they're kind of articulated becomes very, very important. And just to kind of put it in my own personal terms, as president of the college, it was always amazing to me how little people from other parts of the metropolitan area ever journeyed into Macomb County, ever came to some of the activities in the county. The county is relatively isolated. We have to break that down. Now, let me leave this discussion with just two kinds of real important questions for us. The first question is, how do we engage in these kinds of activities with white suburban communities on our own? What kind of independence do we have? Do we wind up in the next 4 years basically defending the Biden administration over all issues, keeping the Republicans at bay, or how we can independently work sometimes with the Democrats and sometimes on our own to build that kind of vision? And then third, and then finally, I think what makes a lot of difference in Macomb County is the question of competence, how well we handle things. And let me just offer the three big issues that are right in front of us today. One, the distribution of the vaccine. Two, this is going to sound a little weird maybe for some of you, the whole question of the post office and getting mail and packages, etc. And third, how do you get people back into the schools? How do you get students back into the schools? Competence around those questions and ability to articulate in very clear terms how we resolve that is going to make a huge difference for the future of the metropolitan area and certainly the future of Macomb County. So with that, I'll stop and be happy to answer questions.
Okay, so the first question I have here for you, Jim, is actually starts out with a statement saying that you realized earlier than anyone how important immigrants are to its future. When Biden opens the country to refugees and non-wealthy immigrants again, will Macomb County move into the future or go back to its worst former behavior?
I think in this case, I think it's going to go to the future. One of the things that is kind of interesting about the county is how welcoming it has been to immigrants, and the county exec and you know, and I know Pam Lavers is on the call here. Pam Lavers ran an organization called One Macomb, which really, you know, was the organization that was open to new immigrants and did some incredible things in the schools. Right now, Macomb County is the center of the Chaldean community. It's the center of the Albanian community, and it's also the center still of, you know, Poles and Hmong coming from Hamtramck and the Bengali community. We did a little survey when I was president of the college. We surveyed the graduate classes every year. 20% of the graduates from Macomb County, Macomb Community College spoke a language other than English at home. So I think it's going to grow. I think you're going to see the suburbs as significant areas of new immigrants. How those new immigrants see their vision of progress and change is important ones for the future.
It is, and I'm an immigration attorney, and it always amazes me that the more recent the immigrant, the less for immigration they are. The more recent immigrants are like, okay, I'm here, close the door. And they are actually people that once they become citizens are often not likely to vote Democrat. So that's, you know, and we all think, oh yeah, they're, you know, they're likely to, but those surveys are always very interesting. So next question. I thought that the media and the Democratic Party did a very poor job explaining why the courts dismissed case after case. It needs to be made clear that although Trump ranted about fraud, however, his lawyers didn't bring any fraud cases because they had no proof of fraud. Maybe this would be a good subject for a Frontline 2 expose. I don't know. Okay, I don't know if that's a question for you. Are there any grassroots cross-party neighborhood type groups operating in Macomb County?
Very little. There are a few organizations in Warren that have started to do some work inside the city. There should be, and there used to be, an alliance around 8 Mile Road that of groups both in Oakland and Macomb County that kind of work together. The tendency in, again, as I said before, there's very few. The concept of civic culture in Macomb County is very, very low. I mean, if you have a beef, you go to the political officials. They'll handle it for you. And that, again, sets up this kind of, the leaders, you know, are going to do things, and we just have to remain passive. There's very little kind of interactions that go on between the communities. And that's something that really needs to be worked on. We tried to do some things at the college around those kinds of questions because we could be, we were in a better position to be a kind of group collaborator and bring people from different communities together. The north-south split in the county is extremely significant at this point. I think that the differences in income, the inequality are very, very significant.
How does conservative evangelical Christianity fit into this mix that you've described?
Oh yeah, well, they play a role. They clearly play a role. They see themselves, you know, as strong supporters of the Republican Party. You know, the abortion issue is a clear, you know, touchstone for them. But they're also are, they have played the role in the county of being supposedly the bastions of ethical behavior, et cetera. I think some of the challenges that Trump has made personally now, I think get ramified as the Republicans have to deal with whether they're going to be, again, supporting him, supporting, his views. There are two wings in the Macomb County Republican Party. The one wing of the older Republicans, the Candace Millers and others who've been around for a long time. And then you have these new, the people really attracted by Trump. The fights between those two are going to be important ones, not to just watch, but to come up with alternatives. I think we need to make clear to the people who live in many of these communities that the Republican Party is not this great, innovative, creative group of people who have their interests at heart. They really represent the small but fairly important upper class that exists in the county.
And that's it for questions in the chat. If anybody has a question that they would like to ask themselves, you could raise your hand or just unmute and take your chances.
Oh, Steve, I can see Steve has got a question.
Hi, Jim. Do you think that Mark Hackel will change his style in response to the dramatically changing social currents all around him?
That's a good question. I would hope that he would. I of course, was somewhat disappointed, to put it mildly, about his lack of reaction to the 2020 elections. It didn't really take a very strong stand in any way. He seems to be, involved at least a little bit more in the issues around COVID in the county. But he has this tendency to shy away from, politics. And in some ways, as he stays in office, he's becoming more and more like a traditional, Democrat without very much of a base. Now, having said that, because he comes out of law enforcement, because he's, has a kind of style which fits into the county very well, he's one of the few people who polls very well in northern Macomb County, and has a pretty consistent base. I wouldn't be surprised though if the Republicans try to take him on next time, and then I think we're going to see a very interesting dynamic. But it's a hard one. He could have represented and done far more to bridge over the inequalities in the county, and really hasn't done that.
Jim, I'd like to follow up something you and I talked about the other day, which is the fact, as we both read in the Free Press, and probably other people have as well, the extent to which Michiganders, Michigan Republicans, Trump supporters continue to believe that the election was rigged. That seems to be throughout the country a very solid belief and a justification for the kind of craziness we saw a week ago in the Capitol. And the question is, why? Why do people believe something that is not only patently untrue, but that so many steps have been taken to mollify these people, the recounts and the cases people brought before the courts, and one thing after another, the certification processes. All of this has been so much in the public eye, and half of the country seems to have ignored it or refused to believe it, and to the point where Ted Cruz wants to set up another process having gone through all these other processes. So all of that it's a bit crazy when you look at it, and yet people continue to believe it. It's like a deep article of faith, as deep as their commitment to Trump. And my question is, where's that coming from? Have you thought about, you know, how, what it means and how to change it? Because, you know, we're about to go into the Biden administration, and something like, is it half of Republicans believe that the election was fixed and believe that the Biden shouldn't be inaugurated?
Yeah, I think that's a critical issue that, you know, I wish, you know, Andy was here. I mean, you know, on the national level, it'd be far more important to have Trump say that he actually lost, you know, than anything else, you know,
Right.
whether he goes to jail or not, or because people have believed it. Now, I think one of the things which the Republicans did very consciously is sort of create this mystique, you know, with the flags and going out, you know, and this issue of voting on election day as opposed to absentee ballots, and the suspicion that somehow the absentee ballots were all, I mean, this plays into, I think, a view which unfortunately people readily accepted. I think that it's almost as if a campaign has to be launched now by some of us to basically take those issues on. I mean, maybe have a debate over it. Where's the proof at all in Macomb County that the election returns are different than what you say? You know, and if it's only going to be concentrated on Detroit and 2 or 3 other, you know, urban areas in the state, we should call that out in terms of race. Look at the, you know, really don't let this issue ferment any further. That it has to be taken on, and it has to be taken on in terms of how people view the electoral process. I think that could be turned a little bit and turned on to the Republicans. I mean, Andy talked about this. You know, if we want to talk about elections and we want to talk about voting, why not, you know, give DC, you know, become a state? Why don't we talk about the fact that the Republicans have consciously never made election day a holiday, never gave people the right time to vote, even if they were working? You know, raise all the issues around democracy as absolutely critical for the future of Macomb County, and take on these questions within that light. I think you're going to see the Republicans back off very, very quickly, that they're not in favor of having everybody vote. They're not in favor of making it possible to have more mail-in registration, that they're in favor of challenging people, etc. So yeah, I think this is a key question. Now, how we do that without getting involved in all the traditional electoral politics is the part which I think we got to figure out how to do that independently.
I have a question from the chat. What is dying in Macomb County? What is being born in Macomb County? And why such importance is being placed on the Democratic Party?
Good question. Well, I think what's dying in Macomb County is the former, you know, it's an auto capital, it's an auto community still based on the auto industry, but there's a whole lot less people working in assembly plants and hourly labor, etc., and a whole lot of research and development, electric cars, autonomous vehicles, and all of that. So that's what's growing. What's shrinking is the traditional, you know, working class, you know, factory workers. What's growing in Macomb County is a whole bunch of people who have been disenfranchised out of the traditional working class into really poorer, lower wage service industry jobs, or smaller factory jobs that are that produce low income. So you have, and you know, and sort of Andy said this a little bit earlier, 20 years ago or 30 years ago, you know, one person could work and a family could be raised and sort of, and there were benefits from the job in a unionized setting. Now you have, you know, families of two people working full time without benefits. So the level of poverty, and one of the, you know, this is statewide, but it's true in Macomb County, about 40% of the jobs, of the wages of people in the county produce less than $20 an hour of, you know, any kind of sustainable, you know, lifestyle. So the county has gotten poorer. At the same time, there is a part of the county that's gotten wealthier, and so the split that occurs between the two, and figuring out how you resolve those, you know, issues. You know, what kinds of communities that, I mean, you know, we forget about transportation, how important that is. We found that more and more students coming to Macomb were coming by bus. How you deal with those issues now, the first time that these are issues now that the county has to deal with. So what I think is growing is the diversity in the county. There's a significant African-American population. 35% of the students in Warren school districts are African-American. That part of the county has not been mobilized in any way to really make demands upon county leadership for the kinds of services that they really, really should have. So I think those are some of the changes.
Don, go ahead.
Yeah, Jim, you mentioned competence being a big issue for Macomb County residents because of a lack of a democratic vision. My question has to do with corruption. I think where the National Democratic Party missed the boat on Trump in terms of impeachment is not focusing on corruption. You know, they impeached him over Ukraine. They didn't do anything over emoluments. Even now, as bad as the situation is, incitement to insurrection, what I think they should be doing, Trump's call to the Secretary of State in Georgia, where he was demanding finding 11 or 12,000 votes. What could be more corrupt about that? And the fact that the Democrat Party just seems to want to focus on one issue. As bad as it is, I think if they would have joined that with the corruption issue, I think people would respond to that. And for some reason they don't. And I think that would have a big impact. And I'm wondering what you think in terms of Macomb County.
Certainly the corruption would have a big impact in Macomb County. People basically see politicians as just another kind of workers who are just out to enrich themselves. To an extent that Trump got away with saying, well, he was so rich, you couldn't really touch him. He wasn't really corrupt. I think you're absolutely right. It should have been stressed far more. You know, again, the view that the common sense view often articulated in Macomb County was, you know, all politicians are corrupt. So, you know, you just have to pick the one that their corruption may serve them, but somehow it complements what you do. I think we could have shown that the corruption that Trump in particular was interested in was not really serving, the people in the county. There was strong support in the county, for example, for healthcare. Very, very strong support for healthcare. In fact, that's one of the issues where the Democrats kind of harped away, and people really saw healthcare as very, very important to their future. There's strong support in Macomb County for public education. There are very, very few charter schools, relatively few private schools. People really see, part of it is because of the low income, but part of it is that they see public education as a future for their kids. playing up those issues and really exposing how the Republicans are not for public education. I was surprised that there wasn't more emphasis on taking on, for example, one of our great Michigan politicians, divorce. Divorce would have been, could never fit in Macomb County's vision of what public education was like.
Another, how likely is it that anybody, you or anybody else, could get Candace Miller or other Republicans to say the election was legal?
I think they have to come to grips with this. I don't think they can. I mean, again, if it's sort of like going through an expose. Candace, where's the proof? What kind of proof do you have? If we have to go through this again and again and again, it's worth doing, because at some point, I think you wind up with literally an empirical argument here. What did happen at 3 o'clock in the morning at the counting of the votes? All the stuff that they've raised is just mythology, but I think we shouldn't avoid dealing with it. I guess that's my point. And maybe Candace, and I'm not sure that Candace actually hasn't accepted it. I think there are other Republicans who are much worse on that subject, but I could be wrong. I mean, I'd be interested in anyone else's opinion on that in the group.
Well, it's just a comment that Liz Cheney came out in favor of impeachment. Why not Candace Miller?
The Republican Party has to be made accountable, and the question is how you do that without just simply defending whatever goes on that Democrats do. I think that's how you develop an independence around this is going to be the most difficult part of what we're faced with. One more thing, I certainly think that if we look at what's going to be said in the schools about this election, we should have a clear narrative around the 2020 election that doesn't say that somehow Biden stole the election. And I think that can be done through civics classes, that can be done directly through the intermediate school districts, and that should be done and made very, very clear. So at least for younger people growing up, they don't get this myth that somehow Biden stole the election.
Jim, that could be done here, but it can't be done in the conservative states. States control educational policy.
Right. But I think it would make a difference all over the country, but certainly it would make a huge difference for us here in the metropolitan area.
Yeah.
And I think that's the end of the questions. Do you have a closing comment you'd like to make?
Only that I think, while the elections were disappointing, and certainly what's going on now is very, scary and unusual, and you wonder what's going to happen. I would just urge people to look beyond the rhetoric of coup or, insurrection, etc. That's a relatively small amount of people who are crazy with guns, etc. But look to what we need to do, which is to remember that the election was close. There are a lot of people who need to be organized to have a different view of the world if we're all going to be successful in the future. And that's what we've got to spend the next 4 years doing. So with that, I'll stop.
Well, thank you, Jim. I'm glad that you ended on that note, because one of the questions we've been wondering is, where do we go from here? Is there a rainbow at the end of all this? if we put the work in. And I guess that's what you're telling us, that
Right.
there is a positive future to come out of all of this. So thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Jim.
I did want to mention that our next meeting is February 17th, and that will be featuring Lucino Hamilton, who was recently freed from Michigan prison and exonerated after 26 years. And it will be moderated by Jeff Cohen, who's the founder of Roots Action. And Lucino is becoming a new important spokesperson about the issue of mass incarceration. So that's another deep subject we're going to be jumping into, and I hope you'll join us. And I think that's it. Does anybody have any last questions in general to pose? Is that it? Well, I think that brings our meeting to a close. It's been great. Thank you for pulling it all together, Jim.
Thank you.
And you'll report back to Andy, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to end the recording now.
Does anybody want to stay on?
Yeah, let's.
Talk, because